Good morning, everyone. It is day 2 of our starting sourdough starter challenge. Let's call it that. I wanted to give you a little bit more info about sourdough because today is going to be a very easy day in terms of actually making the starter. So after yesterday's video, someone told me that you can actually go online and buy part of a sourdough starter that came across on the Oregon Trail in 1847. That's how old this starter is. And what happens is as you continually feed it, it grows a little bit. You can take little pieces of it off, and you can actually buy, and they'll ship it to you online. You get a little chunk of the starter to start your own. But we're making our own. This is going to be our quarantine starter, and who knows, maybe in 150 years, your great-great-great-grandchildren will be still using the starter that you created today, this week. So here's our starter. Doesn't look like much, but what's happening in there? All right, so a little bit more info about sourdough starter and how it works. All around us in the air, on the surfaces of your countertops and plants and in the soil, there's what's called yeast and bacteria. And these are tiny little things in the air and all around us that we can't see, but they're doing lots of important things to keep us alive and to keep our world working through just the way God has designed everything. You remember back in science class that we talked about the bacteria that live on the root systems of plants that help convert some of the atmosphere into things that are usable for the plants. The same thing's actually happening here. We've got yeast and bacteria are in the air, and they come in contact with our flour and water mixture here, and they say, ooh, that's good. I like to eat some of that stuff that's in the flour. And so they kind of latch on, and the yeast turns some of the compounds, the molecules in the flour and water mixture, it turns it into two things. It turns it into ethanol and carbon dioxide. We talked about carbon dioxide when we were talking about the atmosphere. It's a big part of our atmosphere, and it's important for living things. Plants feed on it, and these yeasts and bacteria feed on it. And so we got ethanol and carbon dioxide being created by these yeasts, and there are bacteria, really great bacteria, that just love to eat ethanol. And they're like, ooh, yeah, that's great. I'm going to eat some of this ethanol. And when those bacteria eat those ethanol, they produce some slightly acidic compounds, kind of like lemon juice is very acidic, sour type flavor. That's why they call it sourdough. But that actually preserves the sourdough starter. That keeps bad bacteria that would possibly make us sick, that actually keeps it away. But the good bacteria, which doesn't make us sick, is actually protecting the sourdough and keeping it safe to eat. That's why you can leave this stuff out for forever at room temperature. Not many foods you can do that. They'll spoil eventually. But because the sourdough starter is being protected by the acid that's being created by this bacteria, it's going to be safe to eat basically forever as long as we keep feeding it. So that's kind of a little bit of what's going on in here. Lots of really cool stuff, this really great little ecosystem of bacteria and yeast and food for it. All we have to do today on day 2, whenever you think about sourdough, whenever you think about your starter, come on over and stir it up. Because this yeast and bacteria, they're on the air, we want to keep exposing different parts of this starter to the air. You see we've got a little bubble here. That might be just because I was stirring this up. eventually, once this really starts going and we've got enough yeast to convert it's really the sugar in the flour, the carbohydrates that are in the flour, it starts converting them to carbon dioxide, it's going to start bubbling. And the bubbles are going to make it rise. And so one thing to keep your eye on is the level. Hopefully when we come back tomorrow, this is going to be a little bit bigger. Once your sourdough starter really gets going, it might be about here one day and you wake up the next morning and there's this much. And so then you would take that top part off, use that to start baking your bread, and the next day you'll have that much again. It'll keep growing as long as you feed it and take care of it. So, we talked a little bit about science, a little history. I mentioned in 1847 you can go online and buy that Oregon Trail sourdough starter. I found the reason it's called sourdough, even though this technique has been around for thousands of years, when the gold rush happened in California, which we just talked about in our history class, when the gold rush happened in California, people came over to San Francisco first. They would, usually come either through Panama or all the way down around the tip of South America. They might come across by land, but if they came by ship, they would start in San Francisco. They would land in San Francisco and then make their way up into the hills near Sacramento and eventually all around to find gold. Now, they needed food, and sourdough was a great way for them to take some food, because remember, it keeps for a long time, because for the acidity keeps it safe from bacteria. They didn't have refrigerators, obviously, so any food that they took had to stay safe at room temperature for a long time. And so sourdough was a great idea and a great way to do that. And so that's how San Francisco became known for its sourdough. It has kind of a sour taste. I love the taste of sourdough. It's so great. My favorite bread. But it became known as sourdough in San Francisco during the gold rush. And that's why San Francisco is so famous for its sourdough even today. So cool little history lesson there about sourdough. So like I said, just keep stirring it up. If you only stir it 2 or 3 times, or even just once, that's fine. If you stir it once every hour, that's fine too. You don't need to be on a schedule today. We're just taking care of our sourdough. Tomorrow, I think we'll feed it again, give it a little more flour and water. And in about a week, just to give everyone an idea, about a week, we're going to be ready to bake our first bread. In about a week, we're going to let this thing grow. All right. So that's our sourdough lesson for today. Keep stirring, and maybe send me a picture of your sourdough if you decide to start making sourdough with me. That would be awesome to see. All right, take care, everyone. See ya.